Hey everybody, and welcome to Charts with Dan. It's going to be kind of an interesting show because there's been so much news today and in the last couple of days that it's going to be a little bit less about the box office because, let's be honest, there's not a whole lot of box office news, at least about what's coming out this weekend or what came out last weekend. It's going to be a lot more about the overall landscape because there were some big changes that happened today that I want to talk about. However, before we get into that, I do want to mention, even though this is outside the realm really of box office and movie news, sometimes there are people whose lives transcend any sort of interest group or any sort of topic or subject matter that the show may normally cover. And I wanted to take a moment and acknowledge the passing away of John Lewis at age 80. He was an instrumental, a key figure in the civil rights movement here in the United States. He was one of the freedom riders. He also was one of the speakers at the 1963 March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. He was beaten crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, and he was a representative for Georgia's 5th Congressional District for over 3 decades. There are great people. There are people whose lives have great meaning and significance, but there are very few people who you can say legitimately and unquestionably change the world. And John Lewis was one of those people whose actions changed the world. It is a struggle that he himself gave his literal blood, sweat, and tears to. It's a struggle that continues, as evidenced by the events that have been going on here in the last several months in the United States. But he was truly a legend to so many people, a legend to the civil rights movement. If you want to know more about John Lewis, there is a documentary that actually came out just a matter of weeks ago called John Lewis, Good Trouble, which you can now get on premium video on demand on several different platforms, including iTunes and Amazon. But I would be remiss if I did not take a moment to mention John Lewis's passing. We should only be so lucky to have more people like him pass our way at a time when that is so desperately needed. So from that, we will transition to the movie/box office news of the day, and let's begin with something that was expected, but that was finally announced this morning by Toby Emmerich, the chairman of Warner Brothers. Tenet, which was scheduled to come out on August 12th, has once again been delayed. It has not been given a new opening date, although Warner Brothers has said that the new date is set to be announced imminently. Now, at one point, Tenet was supposed to be the film that opened theaters back up in mid-July. It has been delayed a couple of times now, and this is different in that they're not moving it 2 weeks. They're not just moving it down the road a little bit. It has been pulled from the schedule. However, there are some things to note and a little bit of the fact sheet to run over before we talk about the big picture here. As I mentioned, Toby Emmerich in the announcement saying that Tenet will not come out on August 12th as planned, but he did say, quote, "We are not treating Tenet like a traditional global day and date release, and our upcoming marketing and distribution plans will reflect that." Now, according to sources, there is not going to be an abbreviated theatrical window for Tenet, meaning it's not going to get a nominal release and then put on demand, premium video on demand like a lot of other films have. As a matter of fact, we may be looking at a substantially longer window of release for Tenet, which is something that they had been toying with when they were planning to release it nationwide, which was to put the film out and then allow it to play longer. However, we're looking at an even bigger modification. The big banner headline from this being that international theaters and international markets where theaters are open may be getting Tenet before the United States. Warner Brothers reportedly not ruling out Tenet opening globally before it opens anywhere here in the domestic market. It also means that Tenet may play in parts of the United States where theaters are open, but not in other parts, which, by the way, would probably mean New York and Los Angeles, the two biggest film markets in the country where theaters are closed. So we could see this staggered release schedule. Ironically, this is very much how films used to open, although they would largely open in New York and Los Angeles and then roll out across the country. We may be seeing a reverse of that, where Tenet opens in smaller areas first, areas where it is safe to open movie theaters, and won't roll out to the more populated areas until later, until the case numbers go down and until it's been deemed that movie theaters can open safely. Now, what does that mean for, it means so much. First of all, the majority of critics like myself, of people that particularly that write for newspapers or that work for television outlets, live in these big population centers. That means that we may not have access to Tenet when it opens. This is, I mentioned on Twitter earlier today, we have moved from the era of release dates being pushed to the era of what a traditional release structure is being completely rewritten in the wake of these continued delays and in the fact that this virus is not going away and in fact continues to surge, again, largely here in the Los Angeles area. LA County, we are on the brink of a complete and total stay-at-home shutdown, reportedly, because our case numbers keep surging. Movie theaters are not going to open here anytime soon, indoor movie theaters at least. Drive-ins are open and thriving. But how long will that last? We just don't know. So how is this going to work with Tenet? Well, we may have gotten a bit of a clue. Remember, a couple weeks ago, I was talking about the third film in the Conjuring series and how that was reportedly due to move to next summer. That is the case. They announced today that The Conjuring 3, The Devil Made Me Do It, is moving off of its September 11th date this fall and moving to next June. So it is moving into summer 2021. There's now speculation that depending on where it is safe for theaters to open, where different counties and cities and states have licensed movie theaters to open, that may be the date that Tenet begins its domestic rollout, perhaps its rollout around the world, and open when and where it is safe for it to do so. So I think the one thing that we are sure of about Tenet right now is that the concept of a simultaneous nationwide release is off the table. It's not going to happen. However, it does seem like Tenet will open this year, perhaps in a couple of months, in markets where it is deemed safe to do so, in places where indoor movie theaters have been licensed to open, perhaps in drive-in movie theaters. We don't know yet. I'm sure that there are all kinds of rules and regulations about that. And in different countries where theaters have been open, there are European markets where theaters have been open for a while. We're going to talk about China, a massive market that today opened a large number of their theaters. There are many international markets that are there waiting for films to come out, and it looks like Tenet may be headed there, even if it cannot play here in the United States. This is a huge development, perhaps the biggest development as far as the future of movies since the shutdown of theaters. We will continue to watch and see what Tenet does. Also worth noting at the moment, Wonder Woman 1984 and Dune, their release dates have not been affected. They are both set to open in October and December. Of course, that may change, but Tenet will really be a test case in many, many ways, it seems, as to the future of theatrical distribution, particularly for these large event films. Now, this is likely to set off another round of release date changes. There's already been one in the wake of Tenet moving off the schedule. Sony's The Broken Hearts Gallery, which was set for August 7th. Sony has moved that off of their release schedule indefinitely, although they have also said that they plan to release it in theaters when it is safe to do so. But this is just a brief look at some of these key dates that have changed. Tenet now off the schedule, TBD when it's going to be moved out. The Conjuring 3 now set for next summer. And then something I actually did not note last week, which is that Candyman, which was set to open in late September, actually moved back to October after Halloween Kills moved off its release date. So Candyman also moved back a few weeks. I think that we're going to see perhaps Unhinged, which right now, and we're going to get to that countdown with a question mark, and maybe that question mark has never been bigger than it is today, is still set for July 31st. We still have movies set for August, and we also have Mulan set for a date coming up soon. Will that stay the same? Will it change? I think we're going to find out very soon, and I think the answer is that a lot of these movies, if not all of them, are going to be moving. But as of right now, those are the changes to the schedule. So let's talk about the other big story of the day. Last week, many theaters in China were given the okay from the government to open, and today is actually the first day that a lot of them were open for business. According to reports, this is one that I read in Deadline, the first day brought in grosses reported to be around $500,000, which when you think about the size of the Chinese market is of course minuscule compared to the amount of money that would be coming in at a normal time. Really interesting to note the restrictions that China is putting on the theatrical movie-going experience. Number one, they are not booking any movies that are over 2 hours long. And why is that? Well, that's because studies have shown that the transmission rate for coronavirus seems to increase with prolonged exposure and in places where air is recirculated, aka most movie theaters. So as a safety measure, China has said that no movie can be shown in the country right now that's over 2 hours long. There are no concessions being sold at these films. Face masks are required throughout the film. Temperature checks are being done to all patrons. Capacity is capped at 30%. There's 1 meter of social distancing required. And Beijing, which is, of course, a huge city in China right now, does not have any theaters open. There are some surrounding areas that are also not open due to an increased level of coronavirus cases. However, I was doing some reading today. It seems like the clearance may be given somewhat soon for those theaters to open as well. One thing to notice is that for films that are being re-released in China, the distributors are waiving their fees. So exhibitors, meaning theater chains, theater owners, are receiving 100% of the gross on films that are being re-released. Coco is one of those films. As a matter of fact, it was in the top 5 reportedly on the first day that theaters were open in China. So if you are re-releasing a film in China right now, all of that money is going to the theaters and the theater chains, probably to offset, number one, the massive losses that have been incurred over the past several months. Keep in mind that China theaters have been closed for far longer than U.S. theaters, about 2 months longer. Also because, as I mentioned, no concessions are being sold, a huge revenue stream for these theaters that they don't have. So waiving those fees helps to entice chains to help get the money flowing again. On new movies, however, that is not the case. Distributors are not waiving their fees because obviously it's a new release. You have to bring in some money. There are some films, some Hollywood films that are slated to open. As a matter of fact, this Friday, 2 of them, Doolittle and Bloodshot, have been given release dates. They will be released in China this Friday. Next Friday, the 31st of July, 1917, which had its date pushed earlier this year, will open. There are some other films like Sonic the Hedgehog, which was expected to do extremely well in China, that do not yet have release dates. The one thing that is not expected anytime soon is the release of these big, massive Chinese blockbusters that were pushed off the schedule, that were to come out during the Chinese New Year window, a huge money-making window for the Chinese film market. It is expected that those films will not come out until early October at the earliest, because they want to make sure that the film-going market is stable, that there's no resurgence, that the maximum number of theaters are open, that consumer confidence is up. So these big films, the massive Chinese blockbusters, are likely to not open in China because the government and the film industry want to make sure that they are in the best position to succeed. Speaking of success, we actually have the first big pop on the international film market this weekend that we've had in several months, and that pop belongs to Peninsula, which is the sequel to Train to Busan that came out a couple years ago. Was a huge hit internationally, was a big hit here domestically on Netflix. In 5 Asian markets, South Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Singapore, Peninsula brought in nearly $21 million just on its own. It did over $1 million on IMAX screens, and this is crazy to think about the fact that we are nearing the end of July. This gave IMAX its first $1 million plus weekend since March. As a fan of Train to Busan, I'm excited to see this film. I loved that movie. I'm sure that the sequel will find its way here, whether it's on Netflix or elsewhere. That is really exciting to me, and it's great to see a little sign of life in the international box office, something that we haven't seen in quite some time. Well, skipping over the weekend chart because there's really not one to speak of, and I wanted to get this in the can a little bit earlier today because I felt like the news of this week was a little more interesting. But let's go back to a very historic weekend just 12 years ago. Back on July 18th through the 20th of 2008, The Dark Knight set a new domestic opening weekend record and ushered in a new era for superhero films. Of course, Spider-Man, X-Men, Blade, they really, you could say, kicked off the modern era of superhero films. But I think that The Dark Knight ushered in an era where they were seen by many as legitimate movies. Now, that's not fair that they weren't viewed that way before, but the fact that it came in with such prestige, it won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for Heath Ledger, it being excluded from the Best Picture race helped the Academy to nudge its rules to include more in the Best Picture race in years beyond that. I really do think that there was a new era that was unveiled when The Dark Knight hit theaters. That was number one, obviously over $150 million. Mamma Mia opened in a strong second place. That was also a very successful film that summer. Hancock and Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, 2 other superhero films that were holdovers there in the top 5. And then there at number 4, you had Brendan Fraser's Journey to the Center of the Earth, So what a mighty Justice League of heroes you had there, and I'm including Brendan Fraser in that list. And you know what? Meryl Streep too. There in the top 5 back in 2008. Obviously, that was a key movie-going weekend for a lot of people. I remember seeing The Dark Knight opening night, and that movie really blew my mind. And crazy to think that now it's really becoming a footnote in history. Not a footnote in that it's forgettable, but it's an event. It's a milestone as opposed to recent history, but that's just how it goes. Speaking of milestones, some other notable moments from this same weekend in years past. Back in 1986, Aliens opened from James Cameron. Sigourney Weaver would go on to get an Oscar nomination for her performance in that film. 1987 saw the opening of 2 key films of the 80s, RoboCop, a perfect movie, and Jaws the Revenge, not a perfect movie, but enjoyable in its own way. Then back in 2010, this weekend has been very good to Christopher Nolan. Inception opened at number 1 back in 2010. The Dark Knight Rises opened back in 2012. And then Dunkirk also opened on this weekend a couple years ago. So this was, of course, supposed to be the big opening for Tenet. You could tell that Christopher Nolan really wanted to hit this weekend because it's been very good to him. But unfortunately, it just was not to be. And we are now still waiting to see when we're all going to see Tenet. Looks like it's not going to be at the same time, whenever that might be. Let's look at the charts for what people are watching at home. Of course, let's start with Amazon. The King of Staten Island there at number 1. That's been at number 1 for a few weeks now, followed by Trolls World Tour, Sonic the Hedgehog, The Gentleman, Jumanji: The Next Level, John Wick, which is actually the only new film on this top 10 from Amazon this week. A lot of holdovers. Game Night, Bad Boys for Life. Then we have 2019's animated film, The Addams Family, and Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle. So both rock Jumanji films there in the top 10 for Amazon. Let's go over and look at what people are watching on iTunes, renting and purchasing. The Outpost remains at number 1 for what I think is a third week. A lot of buzz around that film. People really enjoying it. Followed by Trolls World Tour. Arkansas, which is my home state. That was a 99-cent rental this week, and it is there at number 3, followed by Archive, Lucy, which was a $1.99 rental this week, and then John Lewis, Good Trouble, which is the documentary that I mentioned earlier. Obviously, a lot of people seeking out more information about the life of the legend John Lewis. That's there in the top 10. Then you have Relic, which is currently playing in drive-in theaters nationwide. Stay tuned. You might see a review of that film here on the channel very soon. Then Safe House, a $1.99 rental, Knives Out, which continues to be popular. And then Doolittle, 2020's Doolittle, which will be opening in China this Friday. It's now renting for $2.99 on iTunes, which is why you see it popping up back there again in the top 10. And then now let's move over to Netflix, where Fatal Affair, another Netflix original starring Nia Long and Omar Epps, takes the number 1 spot. Last week's number 1, The Old Guard, drops to number 2. Then you have The Lorax from Dr. Seuss. How Do You Know, a holdover from last week. A 2018 French comedy called MILF is there at number 5. I wonder why. Then Despicable Me, which is an old standby here on the top 10 this summer for Netflix. 365 Days. Devil's Gate, which is a new addition to Netflix, a movie that came out back in 2017. Then you have the F It List. It rhymes with the bucket list, but I don't want to get demonetized, so I'm going to say the F It List, which is a teen comedy there at number 9. And then Desperados, a holdover at number 10. So as we close out the show, we always get to our countdowns, and this is perhaps the most tenuous on both of these countdowns. Like I said, we're really stressing the question mark on both of these. First of all, we have the countdown to new movies. We are still, as of this taping, 11 days from the release of Unhinged. Unhinged is still scheduled to be the first movie released nationwide in movie theaters in 11 days. I don't think this is going to happen, but as of right now, I'm not taking it off the calendar because it's still scheduled. So we are 11 days supposedly from the release of Unhinged in movie theaters. And then we have the countdown to New Mutants, which has been going. And again, New Mutants is still on the schedule. We are 39 days away from the next scheduled release date of the New Mutants. However, if I may go down a rabbit hole here, This week is also Comic-Con at Home week. Instead of the hordes of fans, probably including myself and Mara, descending on San Diego this week, Comic-Con is having an at-home version. All the panels are being live streamed for people to watch at home. The vendors are selling their stuff online. Obviously, it's not anything close to what we would get if everyone could gather together for this convention, but it's the best we can do right now. The New Mutants has a panel at Comic-Con at Home scheduled for Thursday. Now, Marvel is taking this year off from Comic-Con at Home. They don't have anything scheduled for any of their films. DC has their own DC Fandom event scheduled for next month, so there's not any big DC movie news. The New Mutants is one of the only movies that has its own panel at Comic-Con. It's happening on Thursday, and I have a theory. Now, I have no inside information. This is not news. I don't have a source. This is pure 100% Dan Murrell theory. I have a theory that, the reason that it has not gone to any kind of VOD is because there were reportedly some very complex negotiations where HBO had first rights to any Fox X-Men movie through, X year. So they couldn't put, Disney couldn't put New Mutants out on Hulu or Disney Plus because it would have to go to HBO first and you have to work all that out. I wonder if they're going to take advantage of the window that they have, if perhaps behind the scenes there's been some negotiation going and they figured out some kind of a streaming deal for the New Mutants. And if they may take this opportunity as the chance to do the panel for the New Mutants at Comic-Con at Home and then drop it right there and say, you can watch it right now. It'd be a savvy move. It'd be a buzzy move. You get a lot of eyeballs on the New Mutants. Now, is that something the studio would want to do at this point after so many delays and probably a lot of money in pushing this movie back and back and back? I don't know. But if I were looking to make a splash and if I were looking to get a lot of eyeballs on the movie and if I were looking to just get the movie out and not have to worry about changing the release date again, which is a very real possibility, it's not the worst thing you could do. So I wonder, I have a theory. Perhaps this time next week, this countdown might be off because the New Mutants has come out. More than likely, that's not going to happen. More than likely, it's going to stay on its date and then move until the end of time. And then on my deathbed, it's going to look like the end of The Fountain with Hugh Jackman. And I just see the New Mutants in this, I don't have any hair, but this long, just glorious flowing locks will sprout from my head as I finally behold the New Mutants and then pass to the next plane of existence. But I guess it's also possible that they might drop it on Comic-Con this week. We'll see. So before I go, as I mentioned, Comic-Con at Home will be happening this week, and there's always the possibility for news to be breaking. It's possible that you may see what's behind me look a little bit different because Mara and I are actually leaving tomorrow to drive cross-country to go see my mom in Arkansas, as I mentioned earlier, my home state. And this is actually a trip that was planned for a couple weeks ago that we ended up not taking. And I want to take just a moment here at the end of the show to address that and kind of share what's been going on with me for the past couple of weeks. Early on the morning of July 4th, my mom went to the hospital because she was infected with COVID-19. It was something that we'd found out a couple of days earlier that she had been exposed to, and she was in the hospital for nearly 2 weeks. She is now at home. She is recovering. She sounds much better. She's resting comfortably. She has tested negative. She's been released from quarantine, which is why Mara and I feel comfortable taking this trip across country. We will not be flying. We will be driving because we want to be as safe as we can. This was a very difficult situation to go through for my mother. First and foremost, this was not fun. She was luckier than a lot of folks. She never had to go on a ventilator, but this disease is nasty. It worked quickly, and it really put her through the ringer. And, for everyone that said when I talk about, wear a mask, or I think that theaters should mandate masks, everyone said well, if you're so worried about it, don't leave the house. But I think the thing that people overlook is that wearing masks and everything, it's not about you. It's about the people that you may come in contact with. It's about the people that you come in contact with and the people that they come in contact with, because my mom did everything that was recommended. She went out sparingly. She only went out for essential things. She wore a mask everywhere she went. If she was at the parking lot in Walmart and she saw a lot of people going in that weren't wearing masks, she didn't go in there. She went somewhere else where people were wearing masks. She did everything that she was supposed to do to not contract this disease. However, somebody that she was with was not doing those things. They were not being as careful. And through no fault of my mom's, she was in an environment where she was exposed to the disease, contracted it, and was in the hospital for nearly 2 weeks. I see this issue of taking precautions and wearing masks and everything boiled down to like, well, I have rights. I have a right to do this, or I have a right not to do that. And in that sense, you're right. You don't have a right to not get sick. If you want to put yourself in a position to get sick, there's nowhere that says that you can't do that. However, this is not about your right to get sick. This is about the choice that you make to expose other people, because that's what this is. My mom didn't choose to be around somebody that had this. That person, however, did choose to do things that put them in a position to catch this disease and give it to someone that I loved. If you think this is about you, it's not. It's about everyone else. And if you don't care what happens to you, then maybe think for a second about what could happen to somebody that you cross paths with. Somebody that you have to go to work with, somebody that you meet in a store, somebody who's out just trying to live their life and do something that puts food on the table, or go buy the food that they put on the table. Are you really prepared to live with the fact that through your choices that you could pass this thing to somebody else? Because let me tell you, you don't want somebody that you know or love to get this. And can you live with the guilt of knowing that you're the reason why somebody's loved one is in the hospital? I've never felt more helpless in my life than during this whole thing, because I couldn't go see my mom. I had to call the hospital. I had to talk to the nurses, who, by the way, were amazing. And the medical professionals in this country should be applauded every day for what they do still, not just a few months ago, but still today. I could talk to her on the days when she felt like talking, but particularly early on, those were few and far between. If you don't care about inflicting this on yourself, then I promise you, you do not want to inflict this on anyone else, because it is scary and it is lonely and it sucks. It really, really sucks. So I guess the overall point that I'm trying to make here is that this is really an issue of empathy more than anything else. All of these restrictions and guidelines are all about protecting others, not protecting yourself. Because people are right. You get to make the choices about how you want to protect yourself. This is about protecting other people, protecting them from getting sick and dying alone in a hospital. Why would you ever want to inflict that on anybody? Why would you ever want to do anything that takes a chance at inflicting that? And I think that there are so many different things in this world that could go so much better if people would just think about others and think about empathy and think about how what you do affects someone else and not just how it affects yourself. So I am going to wrap up the show. I'm going to get it out there. I'm going to pack. I'm going to get a good night's rest. And then Mara and I are going to get in the car and we're going to drive across the country and we're going to see my mom. And we're going to do it safely. That's why we're not flying. We're going to be wearing our masks. We're packing food. We've got gloves. We've got protective gear, protective equipment. We wouldn't be going if she hadn't tested negative. We wouldn't be going if she hadn't passed quarantine. We're going to be careful while we're there. We're going to be careful on the way back. And when we do get back, we're going to quarantine ourselves for a couple weeks to make sure that even though we were careful, that we didn't bring anything back with us. Is that going to suck? Yeah, it's going to suck. But you know what? You have to think about other people. And I think that so many things would be going so much better if all of us did that just a little bit more. So thank you so much for watching. There'll still be some stuff coming out on the channel. As I mentioned, you might see me live from my mom's house this week talking about Comic-Con stuff. I might go through and uncover a treasure trove of childhood stuff over there, kind of a show and tell type thing. We're still going to be doing stuff for the channel. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time.